Trump said something yesterday. He said, and I'm quoting him directly, "It's our turn." Okay? Now think about that for a second. It's our turn. That's presidential language. That is the most powerful military leader on the planet, speaking to the world, telling Iran, you just made a mistake. And then right after that, he said something else. Something that almost nobody in the press picked up on. He said, America's ammunition cupboards are full. Full and plentiful. Full and plentiful. Okay? I want you to hold on to that sentence. We're going to come back to it. Because that sentence, more than any airstrike, more than any diplomatic meeting, tells you everything about what is really happening in this war right now. CENTCOM, United States Central Command, announced this morning that they have just completed what they called a heavy wave of strikes against Iran. Double the intensity of any previous round. Dozens of IRGC targets destroyed. Military command centers, missile and drone facilities, coastal surveillance systems, maritime capabilities. They said more than 50,000 U.S. service members in the region are, I'm quoting, highly vigilant, focused, lethal, and ready. Okay? The same day all this happened, Trump sat down with Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu at the White House. Netanyahu came with one message: finish the job. Not just the nuclear program, not just the missile sites, the entire military architecture, missiles, drones, the proxy network that stretches from Tehran to Gaza to Lebanon to Yemen to Iraq. And there were people in that meeting, according to sources close to the conversation, who were saying the quiet part out loud: regime change. Also the same day, Trump met with Saudi Arabia's defense minister, Prince Khalid bin Salman. The prince hand-delivered a personal letter from Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. The contents of that letter, never disclosed. But within 24 hours, the United States and Saudi Arabia conducted the first joint military strike in the entire history of this war, hitting Iranian-aligned PMF forces in Iraq. At least 20 fighters killed. And mainstream media's headline from all of this: U.S. retaliates against Iran. Trump escalates. Dozens of IRGC targets destroyed. Okay. On the surface, that looks like America is winning. But today, I do not want to ask who is winning today. I want to ask a different question. A more uncomfortable question. A question that I think almost nobody in the mainstream press is willing to ask. The question is, how does this trap end? Because when you connect the CSIS report that just dropped on July 30 with what's happening in the waters of Malaysia, with the attack on an Egyptian LNG port, with the secret order Admiral Brad Cooper signed 3 days ago that nobody is talking about, the picture that emerges looks completely different from what you see on the news. Okay? Let's go through it together. Here's the frame that mainstream media is giving you. Iran attacks a U.S. military base in Jordan. America responds with airstrikes. Iran threatens to retaliate. America strikes again. Back and forth. A cycle. What experts are calling an escalation spiral. Harlan Ullman, a former U.S. naval officer, a man who has been in these rooms, said it directly on Al Jazeera. He said, if we've not thought this out, then we get caught in this escalatory cycle where we head nowhere except up and up and up. Okay? That is the mainstream narrative. Two sides escalating. Nobody's winning decisively. What we need is diplomacy. And maybe that's right. Maybe. But there are three things that narrative is hiding from you. And when you see all three at the same time, the mainstream frame completely falls apart. Truth number one, Iran just changed the rules of the game. The attack on the Muwafaq Salti Air Base in Jordan, 5 to 6 ballistic missiles, all of them intercepted, was not a standard retaliatory strike. It was not Iran responding tit for tat to an American bombing run. This was the first time in this entire war, going back to the beginning, that Iran launched a preemptive attack, not a response, a first move. Iran chose to strike at the exact moment when Trump had publicly said that negotiations were going very powerful and very friendly, right in the middle of active diplomacy. And you're probably thinking, why would they do that? That sounds insane, right? It's not insane. It's strategic. Iran needed to break what analysts call the no war, no peace stalemate. The slow bleed where Iran's proxy network, its regional leverage, gets chipped away over months without a decisive confrontation. Iran needed to force a binary choice on Washington. Either negotiate seriously and concretely or escalate to a level where nobody can predict or control the outcome. They were calling Trump's bluff. Truth number 2, Iran is expanding the theater of war beyond the Persian Gulf. On the same day Iran fired those missiles at Jordan, Iranian UAVs struck the port of Damietta in Egypt. The targets, 2 liquefied natural gas carriers, the Energos Winter and the gas-locked Salem. Now, where's Damietta? Damietta is Egypt's major LNG export terminal. That liquefied natural gas moves directly to Europe. That is European energy supply. Think about what just happened. Iran is not just attacking US bases in the Middle East. Iran is not just controlling the Strait of Hormuz. Iran is reaching into the Mediterranean Sea and touching the energy lifeline of European civilization. This is no longer a regional conflict in the Persian Gulf. This is global energy geopolitics. And the vast majority of people watching cable news this morning have no idea that attack on Damietta even happened. Truth number 3, America's foundational strategy, dismantle the axis of resistance, is not working. From the very beginning of this campaign, Washington was explicit about the mission. Not just to bomb Iran, to dismantle the entire proxy network. Houthis in Yemen, Hezbollah in Lebanon, Popular Mobilization Forces in Iraq, Quds Force in Syria, Hamas in Gaza. The theory was, cut off the extremities and the body, Iran loses its ability to project force across the region. What is actually happening? PMF just took American and Saudi joint strikes. The very next day, PMF was firing drones into Saudi Arabia's eastern province. The Houthis still control large stretches of the Red Sea. And Iranian UAVs just hit Egypt. The proxy network is not collapsing, it is dispersing, it is adapting. Every head you cut off, 3 appear somewhere else. Mainstream media wants you to see a simple linear war. America strikes, Iran weakens, eventually Iran breaks. But that is not the structure of this conflict. The structure of this conflict is something much more complicated and much more dangerous. So what is the real structure? Okay, I'm going to give you the framework. What is happening right now is 2 separate traps operating at the same time. And the reason this war feels impossible to resolve is that each trap reinforces the other. Let me take you through both. Trap number 1, the asymmetric attrition trap. In game theory, asymmetric attrition is when 2 players are competing in the same contest, but the cost structure for each player is completely different. Think of it as a shop owner, a small independent shop in a neighborhood. A giant corporation decides it wants to take over his block, so they start cutting prices. The shop owner cuts prices to compete. The corporation cuts further. The shop owner follows. The corporation goes lower again. And the only question that matters is not who is stronger. The question is who runs out of money first. Okay? Now apply that to the Strait of Hormuz. Every time Iran fires a ballistic missile at a US base, America fires an interceptor to shoot it down. A Patriot interceptor costs approximately $4 million. A Fat interceptor costs approximately $12 million. An Iranian ballistic missile costs significantly less. And Iran is producing more. Iran just received between 300 and 400 brand new man-pads from China. Shoulder-fired anti-aircraft systems capable of bringing down fighter jets. We already have proof they work. One F-15E has been shot down. One F-35 was struck by Iranian air defenses. Meanwhile, America is fighting this war simultaneously on 3 fronts. Military, constant airstrikes at double intensity. Financial, OFAC sanctions. The Treasury just targeted 2 IRGC maritime insurance companies and 8 ships from Iran's shadow fleet. Geoeconomic. A naval blockade. They're calling the steel wall. All 3 at once. Here is the problem with fighting on 3 fronts at once. When none of those fronts is decisive, you are not winning on all 3. You are bleeding on all 3. And here is something that brings the attrition trap into sharp focus. Not an intelligence report, not a think tank paper, a military order. Admiral Brad Cooper, commander of U.S. Central Command, the man in charge of all American forces in West Asia, signed a confidential letter on July 28th. The subject, cell phone confiscation. Cooper ordered that mobile phones be taken away from American soldiers deployed in the Gulf region. The reason? Iran is extracting real-time battlefield intelligence from American soldiers' social media posts, photographs posted minutes after an Iranian strike, videos of soldiers running to shelter during an attack. reaction comments that tell Iran exactly how effective their missiles were before the Pentagon has even prepared its official statement. Cooper wrote in that letter, and I am quoting directly, the direct, unavoidable cost of this open source intelligence could be measured in the lives of American service members. And here is the specific example he was referencing. A US service member recorded footage on Meta smart glasses, wearable cameras, while running for cover during an Iranian strike on Al-Azraq Air Base on July 17th, and posted it online. Iran watched it. Iran analyzed it. Iran adjusted. Okay? I want you to sit with that for a second. The most technologically advanced military force in human history, satellite surveillance, cyber warfare, AI-assisted targeting systems, and they are being beaten in the information war by their own soldiers' Instagram posts. That is not the behavior of an operation that is in control. Does that make sense? Now, trap number 2, the reputation trap. This is the one that nobody is talking about. And I think genuinely, this is the more dangerous trap of the two. Here is the question I want you to ask. Not does America have enough missiles? We've established the answer to that. The question I want you to ask is, even if America had unlimited missiles, could Trump actually stop this war? And when you look at this through the lens of reputation theory in international relations, the scholarly framework that explains how leaders get locked into positions they cannot exit, the answer is no. Trump cannot stop. Not because he doesn't want to, but because the political architecture surrounding him makes stopping politically suicidal. Let me walk you through the layers. Layer 1, James Fearon and audience costs. James Fearon is one of the most influential political scientists of the last 3 decades. His central argument in democracies, when a leader makes a public commitment or a public threat, they face enormous political costs if they back down. Voters punish leaders who appear weak, inconsistent, or who say one thing and do another. Now consider Trump's domestic situation at this exact moment. Reuters and Ipsos just released a poll. 1/3 of Americans, just 1/3, support this war against Iran. 69% say the administration has never clearly explained its military objectives. After 5 months of continuous bombing, gasoline prices in the United States have risen above $4 per gallon. Inflation is hurting real people. And then Iran attacks a US military base in Jordan. At that moment, Trump has no choice. Not militarily, not strategically, politically. He cannot not respond, because not responding, showing restraint, prioritizing diplomacy, will be framed by his opponents, by the media, by his own base, as weakness. And midterm elections are in November 2026. That is what Fearon means by audience costs. The military decision is being made based on the electoral calendar, not on strategic logic. Layer 2, Shapiro and Randall Schweller on international status signaling. These 2 scholars wrote something that I think is genuinely one of the most important insights in modern international relations research. They argued that, and I am quoting, international status signaling usually stems from domestic political struggles to win legitimacy. In plain language, what you are watching on your screen when you see CENTCOM's heavy wave announcement, when you hear Trump say, it's our turn, that performance is not primarily directed at Iran. It is directed at American voters. Trump is using military action as a communication tool, a symbol of strength, to reassure his domestic audience before an election. The bombs are the message, but the audience is at home. Layer 3, William Nomikos and incompetence cost. Nomikos added another dimension to the Fearon framework. He showed that voters don't just punish leaders for weakness. They punish leaders for incompetence, for visible policy failure. Consider what just happened. The ceasefire, the agreement that was supposed to hold, just collapsed completely. Trump's diplomatic strategy, his deterrence framework, his attempt to negotiate with Iran through Oman, all failed to prevent the July 29th attack. That is a demonstrated policy failure. If Trump doesn't respond with enormous visible force, he is not just weak, he is seen as incompetent. So he stages a massive deterrence performance, not to change the military situation on the ground, but to change the political narrative at home. To hide that the previous round of diplomacy failed. Layer 4, the low flame strategy, and what Israel is quietly saying. Israeli officials have been leaking to journalists that they are deeply concerned, not about the airstrikes themselves, about the temperature of those strikes. The concern is that the Trump administration is deliberately calibrating this conflict to stay, in their words, at a low temperature. The reason, oil prices. If America dramatically escalates, if it goes after Iranian bridges, power plants, oil infrastructure deep inside the country, oil prices spike globally. American gasoline goes from $4 to $6, and that destroys Trump politically before November. So Trump is structurally constrained to strike only coastal targets, only symbolic dual-use infrastructure. Status signaling, a performance of strength rather than a decisive military campaign. This explains the contradiction that otherwise makes no sense. Trump threatens to, and I'm quoting him directly, beat the fucking shit out of Iran, but CENTCOM keeps hitting the same categories of targets it was hitting 16 days ago. The rhetoric is at a 10. The military action is calibrated at a 3. That is not a contradiction. That is a design. The noise and the action are serving different purposes. Layer 5, Hans Morgenthau and prestige policy. Morgenthau, the architect of modern realist international relations theory, wrote that prestige policy works best when it creates a reputation for overwhelming strength so that a nation never actually has to use that strength. The threat is enough. The image is enough. But here's what happens when the actual capability starts to erode. When the ammunition stockpile is depleting. When your jets are getting shot down. When your soldiers are losing their phones because Iran is watching their TikToks. Prestige policy reverses. You're forced to speak louder about your strength precisely because that strength is in question. The declaration becomes compensation for the reality. Remember what Trump said? America's ammunition cupboards are full and plentiful. CSIS published data showing they have burned through a third of their Patriot interceptors and half their THAAD interceptors in 16 days. According to Morgenthau, that statement is not simply a lie. It is the behavior of a leader in the middle of a prestige crisis, maintaining the performance of invulnerability because the alternative is to admit that the invulnerability is already compromised. Layer 6, Jeremy Shapiro and the playground bully. Jeremy Shapiro at the European Council on Foreign Relations published an analysis of Trump's diplomatic style that I keep coming back to. He argued, and this is a direct quote, that Trump behaves like a playground bully, outwardly appearing very powerful, projecting dominance, but in reality extremely averse to using force in any situation that could lead to a genuine fight with real consequences. So the escalating statements, "It's our turn," will smack them around. The threats about bridges and power plants, these are not indicators of strategic confidence. They are the opposite. They are indicators of a side that is unwilling to actually commit to the level of violence that will be required to decisively win. And Iran reads that. Iran has been watching this pattern for years. Layer 7, the credibility trap. Research on compellence theory, the study of how states use threats to force behavior changes in adversaries, shows a devastating paradox. The more a superpower issues threats without following through with decisive action, the less credible each subsequent threat becomes. Iran has watched the United States draw red lines, issue ultimatums, and then stop short of decisive escalation repeatedly over many years. Each new threat now carries less weight than the last. Iran has learned that the bark is worse than the bite, and that learning shapes every strategic calculation they make. Okay? So here's the architecture. 2 traps, both running at the same time. Trap 1, the physical ammunition and air defense capability is depleting faster than it can be replenished. The asymmetric attrition is working against America. Trap 2, Trump cannot stop even if he wanted to, because, and prestige policy dynamics are all pushing him toward continued escalation regardless of the military reality. And here is the dangerous feedback loop. The weaker America's actual position becomes, the louder Trump has to project strength. The louder he projects, the more military action is required to match the rhetoric. The more military action, the faster the stockpile depletes. The faster the stockpile depletes, the weaker the actual position. Iran is watching every iteration of this loop in real time through American soldiers' social media. Does that make sense? Okay? Now, I want to be fair. I want to present the best possible case for the opposing view. The strongest argument that the American strategy is sound, that Iran is losing, that patience will produce a result. because intellectual honesty requires that I take this seriously before I respond to it. Here is the steel man, the strongest version of the pro-America case. America has the largest and most technologically advanced military in human history. It can produce more interceptors. It can choose to expand its target set to include civilian infrastructure, Iranian bridges, power plants, ports, water systems, which would make the cost of continuing unbearable for the Iranian population. Saudi Arabia just entered the coalition. The Iranian economy is running triple-digit inflation. The Iranian people are suffering. The proxy network is under pressure everywhere simultaneously. Israel is a wild card, and all America needs is enough patience to finish the job, okay? I want you to feel the weight of that argument, because it's not nothing. There are smart, experienced people who believe it. Now let me take it apart. Demolish layer 1. The ammunition crisis is real, and status signaling to hide weakness is already happening. The Center for Strategic and International Studies published an analysis using the Pentagon's own 2027 budget documents. The numbers. In the first 16 days of this war phase, the United States consumed approximately 1/3 of its total Patriot interceptor stockpile and roughly 1/2 of its THAAD interceptors. From 2,330 Patriots down to between 759 and 827, from 452 THAAD interceptors down to between 234 and 278. Ryan Bull, senior Middle East analyst at Iranian Network, was asked about this on Al Jazeera. He said, it's high-end air defense munitions like THAAD. Those are running seriously low, and we know from multiple reports that many Pentagon planners are seriously concerned about that supply going forward. And then he said something that almost nobody has quoted back at him. This is not a viable campaign. It looks more like the United States is trying to send signaling to the Iranians that they will climb the escalation ladder rather than carrying out a serious campaign to degrade capabilities. He added, Iran has adapted. This war is now 5 months old, and they've carried out a decentralized mosaic defense strategy. That means an air campaign has to hit many targets, far more than I think the Americans are capable of, in an appreciable time frame to be effective. Now add this, Iran just received between 300 and 400 new Chinese-supplied HAP, next-generation shoulder-fired systems capable of engaging jet aircraft. An F-15E has already been brought down. An F-35 was hit. The U.S. is running low on the standoff weapons, the missiles fired from a safe distance, and if they need to escalate, they have to fly aircraft into Iranian-defended airspace, where there are now 400 new Chinese missiles waiting. And then when the RGC claim, unverified, I want to be clear, not independently confirmed, that on the night of July 30th, in direct response to a U.S. strike on Qeshm Island that killed a family of 3, including their 2-year-old child, Iranian aerospace forces struck Al-Azraq Air Base with ballistic missiles and destroyed 3 F-35 fighters, damaged 3 more, and killed a number of American technical personnel. The IRGC said, our region is no place for an army that cruelly slaughters innocent families in the middle of the night while they sleep. Even if only half of that claim is accurate, the strategic implication is the same. Iran can put ballistic missiles reliably on a runway hosting F-35s, and the US is running out of the interceptors needed to stop them. And remember, Trump told the world the ammunition cupboards are full. Morgenthau told us what that means. Demolish layer 2, Saudi Arabia just put a target on its own back, and nobody asked, then what? Yes, Saudi Arabia entering the coalition looks like a strategic gain. More allies means more power. That is a surface reading, but here is the deeper reading. By conducting joint airstrikes with American forces on PMF in Iraq, Saudi Arabia just crossed the line from neutral observer to direct combatant. Under the IRGC's explicit rules of engagement, Saudi Arabia is now a legitimate military target. The UAE immediately condemned drone attacks on Saudi oil facilities in the eastern province, launched from Iraqi territory. Within 24 hours of Saudi Arabia joining the fight, Iran or Iran-aligned forces were already hitting Saudi oil infrastructure. David Del Rocha, a former senior official at the Pentagon, said this about the overall strategy. They don't have a strategy, only a rough operational plan based on air power. Unless you're dealing with a very small country, that always takes longer than you think, and you always wind up expanding your target set. Expanding, not contracting. The war is getting geographically larger. The circle of direct participants is growing. Saudi Arabia was a buffer. Now it's a target. That is the opposite of strategic progress. Demolish layer 3. Iran just rejected the Oman proposal. That is not how a weak side negotiates. The Stillman says Iran is in economic pain and will eventually negotiate. So let's look at what Iran just did at the negotiating table. Oman, the quiet diplomatic channel that has historically facilitated US-Iran back-channel talks, offered a compromise framework for the Strait of Hormuz, a 50-50 arrangement, shared control. Iran and the international community cooperating on mine clearing, maritime safety, passage rules, a reasonable face-saving middle ground for both sides. Iran's response, no, flat no. Iran is not just rejecting 50-50. Iran is demanding complete unilateral control of the entire strait. Iran insists it alone must conduct all mine-clearing operations. Iran has stated that any European vessel attempting to participate in those operations will be treated as a legitimate military target. And the Strait of Hormuz, the IRGC has stated, will remain closed for as long as American forces continue what Iran calls interference and threats. That is not how a side in pain negotiates. That is how a side with leverage negotiates. If Iran were truly desperate, truly close to breaking, they would have grabbed the Oman 50-50 lifeline immediately. They didn't. They demanded more. That tells you where the actual leverage sits. Demolish layer 4, the oil is still flowing. And here is exactly how OFAC, the Office of Foreign Assets Control, just announced sanctions on 8 specific Shadow Fleet ships. Al-Salmi, Breeze 5, Crystal, Lily, Natsumi, Nireta, Wellsail, and Yehope. Plus 10 transport and logistics entities based in Hong Kong. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent announced the United States will not allow Iran to hold global commerce hostage or use international shipping to finance the IRGC's terrorism, aggression, and repression. Okay? That is the official statement. Now, here is what is actually happening at exactly the same time. The Iranian crude oil tanker named Humanity sailed through the Strait of Malacca, past Singapore, and then approximately 70 kilometers off the coast of Malaysia, in a zone called the Eastern Outer Port Limits, switched off its AIS tracking system. At that location, a 1,200 square kilometer area of international waters, it conducted ship-to-ship oil transfers. The crude was blended with oil from other sources, relabeled, and transferred to third-party vessels that have no sanctions history. That oil then traveled to independent Chinese refineries. Industry insiders call them teapot refineries, concentrated in Shandong province on China's northeastern coast. The payments? Not processed through SWIFT, the dollar-denominated international payment system that America controls. Processed through CPS, the Chinese yuan interbank payment system, and through cryptocurrency accounts, entirely outside American financial jurisdiction. The price. Because the oil is sanctioned, it sells at a discount, $8 to $12 per barrel below Brent crude. That discount does not deter buyers, it attracts buyers. It creates an economic incentive to purchase Iranian oil specifically. The volume, 1.3 million barrels per day, 90% flowing directly to China. CENTCOM announced that since May, they have successfully escorted approximately 1,000 commercial vessels carrying 500 million barrels of oil safely through the Strait of Hormuz. Sounds like a success. But on the night of July 29th, 2 tankers CENTCOM was personally guiding along what they called a safe southern route through Hormuz had to reverse course after one of them caught fire. The IRGC stated immediately, the Strait of Hormuz is our territory. The southern route does not exist. There will be no route for anyone as long as America continues its interference. OFAC sanctioned 8 ships. Iran's shadow fleet has hundreds. The Malaysian transfer zone is in international waters. The yuan payment system is beyond American reach. The discount creates ongoing demand. The sanctions are theater, and the oil is flowing. And now ask, who is the hidden winner of all of this? Not America, not Iran, China. Purchasing Iranian crude at an $8 to $12 discount per barrel, not spending a single bullet, not losing a single soldier, watching 2 competitors exhaust each other while quietly becoming the indispensable energy partner of one of them. That is what strategists call the unseen beneficiary, and Washington is looking the other direction. Demolish Layer 5, the War Powers Act trick, fighting without legal legitimacy at home. Under the War Powers Resolution of 1973, any U.S. president can conduct military operations for 60 days without congressional authorization. After 60 days, you go to Congress, you make the case, you get approval, or the operations must stop. Here's what the Trump administration is doing. They announce a ceasefire, short one, a few days. Then they resume strikes, and they tell Congress this is a new and separate conflict from the previous one. The clock resets, another 60 days begins, no authorization required, again and again. Republican Congressman Thomas Massie, a member of Trump's own political party, went on record. He called this, directly, a ridiculous trick. So to summarize what we have established, America is conducting a war in which the high-end air defense stockpile is critically depleted after 16 days. The strategic objective, finish the job, has no agreed definition, even among America's own military establishment. The president is using a legal maneuver to avoid congressional oversight that a Republican congressman calls ridiculous. Iran is extracting real-time intelligence from American soldiers' own social media. The financial sanctions have failed to stop oil exports, and the entire military performance is being calibrated primarily for domestic electoral audiences ahead of November 2026. That is not what winning looks like. Okay? So what does all of this mean practically? Right now, in the next 48 to 72 hours, I want to give you 5 specific things to watch, and I want to explain why each one matters. Signal 1. The Strait of Hormuz. Watch who gets permission to pass. A Qatari LNG carrier just became the first vessel to transit the Strait of Hormuz with Iranian permission in 3 full weeks. That sounds like an opening. It sounds like Iran is softening. But you have to hold that next to this fact. Iran just refused the Oman 50-50 proposal and is demanding unilateral control. What you are actually watching is Iran selectively authorizing passage on its own terms, not opening the strait, but managing the strait, granting permission to specific countries under specific conditions. Watch which countries get permission in the next 48 hours. The list of authorized nations is a list of countries conducting back-channel bilateral negotiations with Tehran, outside of American diplomatic architecture. That list will tell you more about the actual endgame of this war than any military press conference. Signal 2, Kuwait and Bahrain. The first time these are real targets. After IS strikes on Qushm and Kish Island, IRGC-affiliated social media and communications are explicitly naming Kuwait as the next target. This is new. This has not happened before in this war. If Iran strikes a U.S. military base in Kuwait or in Bahrain, this is the largest geographic escalation of the conflict we have seen. And it puts Trump in an immediate box. Escalate further, knowing the ammunition stockpile is depleting, or open serious negotiations. And that choice has to be made while the midterm clock is ticking. Signal 3, Saudi oil infrastructure in the eastern province. Saudi Arabia made itself a combatant 48 hours ago. The UAE already condemned drone strikes on eastern province oil facilities. If those attacks intensify, if Iran begins systematically targeting Saudi oil production, global oil prices respond within hours of each strike. American gas prices already above $4 go higher. A war that 1/3 of Americans support becomes actively damaging to American households in an election year. Iran understands electoral economics. This is not coincidental timing. Signal 4, European LNG and the Mediterranean, the front nobody is covering. The attack on the Energos Winter and Gasolok Salem in Damietta, Egypt was one of the least covered events of this entire conflict. But it may be one of the most consequential. If Iran continues striking LNG infrastructure in the Mediterranean, Europe faces a direct energy security threat. Watch for European diplomatic statements in the next 48 hours. Watch specifically for European governments that say nothing. Because silence from Europe will signal that they are conducting their own direct conversations with Tehran about energy access, completely independent of Washington. That silence would represent a geopolitical shift as significant as anything happening militarily. Signal 5, and I want you to pay the most attention to this one, November 2026 is the hidden deadline of this entire war. Almost nobody in military coverage names this explicitly, but under the audience cost and prestige policy frameworks, it is the single most important variable in every decision being made. 1/3 of Americans support this war. 69% say the objectives haven't been explained, Gas is above $4. And Iran attacked a US base right after Trump said negotiations were going well. Under the reputation trap, every military decision Trump makes between now and November has to be read through one question. Is this decision serving the strategic situation, or is it serving the electoral calendar? Here's what makes this geopolitically significant. Iran knows the American midterm election date. Iran has a sophisticated understanding of American domestic politics. Iran knows from decades of watching the United States that no American president can afford to appear weak in the 90 days before a midterm election. The knowledge is itself a strategic weapon. Iran can calibrate its pressure, its timing, its offers and refusals based on America's electoral vulnerability. This war is not just a kinetic conflict over the Strait of Hormuz and nuclear capability. This war is also a calendar war, and Iran is playing the calendar. Okay? Here's your homework. Go find the CSIS report from July 30th on U.S. interceptor inventory levels. Read the conclusion sentence. It says, reduced stores may force the United States and its coalition partners to take more risk with interceptions. Then go find Iran's formal response rejecting the Oman 50-50 proposal. Then find Thomas Massey's quote, a ridiculous trick. Then look at the Reuters and Ipsos poll numbers. Then look at a November 2026 calendar. Put all 5 of those things in front of you at the same time. And then ask yourself the question I want to leave you with. That Trump stood in front of the world and said, America's ammunition cupboards are full and plentiful. CSIS said they have burned through half their most advanced interceptors in 16 days. Morgenthau said, you speak loudest about your strength at the exact moment your strength is most in question. Fearon said, a Democratic leader in an election year cannot back down from a public threat regardless of the strategic reality. And Iran is standing in the Strait of Hormuz, selling 1.3 million barrels of oil a day to China at a discount, rejecting 50-50 compromise proposals, and watching American soldiers post videos of themselves running for cover. So here's the real question, and I want you to sit with it. The ammunition is depleting. The election is approaching. The oil is still flowing through Malaysia to China. Saudi Arabia just made itself a target. The Oman proposal was rejected. The war powers clock is being gamed, and the president just told the world the cupboards are full. According to Morgenthau, you speak loudest when you are weakest. According to Fearon, you cannot stop when the election is 90 days away. So the question is not whether America is winning this war. The question is, how long does Iran need to stand still before November 2026? Does what 50,000 American service members and 16 days of heavy bombardment could not? That is the Nash equilibrium of this war.